let us know. If there's something you need to discuss that shouldn't be recorded, we can pause the recording as well. We meet under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation Public Health Organization, and therefore we adhere to the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. There's a link in the minutes if you want to have more details about it, but it basically is trying to prevent us from running afoul of antitrust laws. So no discussions of price or particular bidding opportunities or things like that. So we're trying to steer clear of that. Also, we adhere to our Cardea code of conduct, which the link is also shared in the minutes. Some brief summary is be nice to everyone. Everyone has a voice here and everyone is welcome. So if you have any problems with code of conduct, please contact either myself or Keela. If you have a problem with how myself or Keela are behaving, you can also contact the Linux Foundation public health folks, and they will help resolve any conflicts or issues that come up. I'm going to pause now for introductions. If there's anyone who has not introduced themselves recently or would like to reintroduce themselves, now is a good time to do it.
It looks like I'm the only one who might not be familiar with this meeting. I am the newly hired software engineer in Indicio, and I am primarily focused on developing governance.
Welcome.
And your name is?
My name is Simon.
Simon, welcome, Simon. We're grateful to have you here and have your contributions on the machine readable governance work that Cardea is relying on.
Thank you.
Hi there, this is Christy Gale, and I have introduced myself before, but it has been a few weeks. I have a company that is tracking biometric data rights and name, image, likeness, and other intangible properties of athletes and additional parties, but primarily athletes at this point. And decentralized identity will help transfer, share, and authorize collection and use of athlete biometric and player tracking data, but then also perform other functions as well, compliance and business functions.
Cool.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You might be interested in some of the work of biometrically securing wallets to make a stronger association between the travelers in the Cardea system and the credentials that they present. So good to have you attending.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Other introductions? If not, the two items that I have on the agenda for today are an update on our machine readable governance progress and an update on the technical roadmap that talks about some of the other things that are in progress that we kind of covered with our playbook, the high level goals of the Cardea project and what we're doing to achieve those. There are some low level technical details that are in progress that I wanted to get an update and just let everyone know that some of these things are going on. It's not, our sole focus has not just been on schemas and on governance, but there are a number of other activities that are in progress that are being worked on, and let you know what those are and where we are in that more technical detailed roadmap as well. Are there other items that should go on the agenda for today?
I do want to close the loop. I got a question from RJ, who I noticed is not here with us today, but he did call me right before this meeting to ask about the publishing of the schemas that we have worked so hard on and whether or not we have a timeline for when those will be made available to the group.
I do have an update on the schema publications, and I also had 3 minor things I wanted to highlight on the schemas.
Okay, let's wrap up our schema work, get that current before we move into the machine readable governance and update on the rest of the technical roadmap. Are there other items that should go on the agenda for today as well? If not, Kim, you want to give us an update on schema publication?
Yeah, mind if I share my screen for a moment here?
Go ahead.
Okay, do you guys see the Cardea project here?
Yes.
Okay, so in branches, there's a features schemas branch right now. I'm currently working on putting each one of the schemas in a markdown file. Right now, they are simply an example schema for an Aries, sending this down to the, for example, ACPI implementation. And then I'll be going in and adding in all the details that is in the spreadsheet. And then this can get merged into the Cardea project. So any request to change this in the future, someone can make a branch and then a pull request, and then we can review that as the Cardea project. As far as concerns that I had about the existing schema, the first one was I noticed in the lab order schema that there was a field called test order ID. I've relabeled that to lab order ID to match the lab result schema that had lab order ID. The other thing that I would make a recommendation on is that we have a vaccine record ID field and a vaccine exemption record ID field. That way, if you ever have to go back to the source that has issued you that record, they may have an internal identification system for those records and would be able to look those up better. Those are the 3 minor changes I have on the schemas.
Any
Okay.
comments or objections or updates to what Kim has proposed?
I think those sound very reasonable.
Any thoughts about the markdown, putting these in markdown files to allow easy pull request management and discussions on this in the future?
I think markdown is a good representation for it. Do you envision having a markdown representation of the schema as it would be sent to the Indy ledger, or do you want to put the comments in as well?
So this is how we would pass it to the ledger right now. And so this is how I've implemented this against using ACPI. And so I pass this in, and this gets passed down to the ledger. And then I would also like to provide some example cases of the different fields in the markdown files.
Do you envision having that in a single markdown file per schema, or?
Yes. So right now, there's an individual markdown file per schema here.
Okay.
One thing that I would find very valuable is ensuring that we have the field types so that we know what values are expected in each field.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. And so this example here will be at the bottom of the file. And then at the top of the file, I will have the field category, value type, and description, and any comments or other notes that are associated with those individual fields.
So there are actually at least 2 other schemas that need to be put into the markdown. First one is the test ID. Do we have that one in there? That's the lab order.
That's the lab order.
Okay, and then the trusted traveler.
Yes, and I think we might need to do a schema review on trusted traveler at some point.
Okay,
Agreed.
We'll probably also want to add the medical release consent schema.
okay, so we have two more to queue up in the schema adventure. Let's schedule those for a subsequent
Future.
call and future calls so that we can cover those and make those available for review. I think the trusted traveler one is particularly boring in my opinion, in that it has a very limited number of fields, and but there may be some debate about that limited number of fields. So let's schedule that for a future call to review both the medical release and the trusted traveler schemas. Are there other comments or items for future present or future consideration on the schemas? Okay. Good work on that. We have spent a fair amount of time trying to make our work interoperable and make it so that it's comprehensive and covers beyond COVID. That's really cool. And I think that these additional two schemas that we should review will, I think, complete the basic set. There are probably a couple of more that could be added in as time goes on, regarding identity of a person and presenting their data for lookup in a medical facility. But let's take that up in our next conversation about schemas. Any other items for the roadmap? If there are none, we'll go to an update on our progress on the machine readable governance. Mike, do you have an update for us today?
Yes, I'm typing like furiously here to get something to go here. All right, let's do this. All right. So this is the document we went over last time. I'll just review the updates that we've made to it. So last time we were putting in a bunch of pseudocode to kind of describe generally what kind of things we wanted to try and capture. And here is some an updated sample of the governance. There were a couple of ideas that were contained in the original RFC that we based this off of that we thought would be potentially helpful to adopt. So for example, you can add a topics field so that if someone is doing discovery of a governance frameworks on at like a registry or network level, they could say, I'm looking for medical governances, or someone could say, I'm looking for travel governances, or someone could say, I'm looking for ID governances or whatever. There were also described jurisdictions and geographies. So here are two samples where you could say, let's drill down to the jurisdiction of New York City, or describe the general jurisdiction of all of Aruba. In cases where geography and jurisdiction sometimes aren't perfect overlaps, you could say, you know, describe them a different way. Here's an initial schema list of things that we could put here. So we talked about adding the medical release. This name might not be quite right. There's a lab order, lab result, vaccine exemption, trusted traveler, and then possibly some identification or KYC type credentials, such as an email or an SMS credential. The roles we have seen before. We were looking at the prerequisites, the preconditions kind of code. This is, so for example, you could say a trusted traveler requires a lab result or a vaccine exemption. A lab result can require a lab order, something like that. The big piece that we worked on was trying to define the, we went for the complicated piece first and to make sure that we had no major holes in our understanding. So rules about prerequisites or roles, a lot of the times are fairly simple, but we looked at interaction documents that Keith from the Aries Working Group had presented. And so we took a stab at trying to define what the potential steps to the process are and how the machine code would be able to determine where in the process the machine is and what are the steps and things it's supposed to do. And this is not perfect yet, but it's promising. So for example, one of the steps could be to identify the holder. And let's see here. I think I've got a mistake here. Let's see, identify. So the issuer or verifier could say, I'd like to identify the holder and say, this is the initial state for issuers and verifiers, is that they want to figure out who someone is before they take other actions. One of the things that that could be put in here is a list of actions, such as, and this particular list of actions is pretty much only one step, which is to say, let's ask for proof of legal status, so such as passport and demographics, to identify who this person is. And then the next steps would be, let's move on to getting a lab order or lab result, a vaccine exemption or a vaccine. And then, so these are the names of states that are further down this list. So once these actions are accomplished, then the parties involved would know where to go next. Say, okay, now that you've identified the patient, let's move on to a lab order or maybe to the exemption or the vaccine. And then you could say, okay, a lab order, here's what you do. And that may differ from what you do for a lab result. The idea of...
Are you trying to model like a credential choreography or a protocol choreography there? Or are you trying to model just the happy path, or is it take into account what are the error conditions and so forth? So
we were looking at what exists for protocols and how would an interaction document or a governance file differ from what's already in the steps that you would take for a protocol. So agents should already understand, here are the steps to connecting. They should understand, here are the steps to issuing. Here are the steps to doing a proof. But what the protocol does not contain is, and probably shouldn't, is to say, once you've connected, what does this particular agent do next? And so we're modeling steps, from protocol interaction to some other protocol interaction. And so it's kind of like a state machine for the interaction between the agents above the protocol level.
You're trying to chain together the protocols or the interactions that occur you're trying to take a sub action, which might be a protocol interaction that has 7 steps within it, but then chain it to the next thing that you would do upon either a successful or a failed completion of that protocol interaction.
Right, and those are the kind of things that may differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So for example, Aruba allows a workflow where you arrive at the airport without having been tested, and you can get tested there at the airport. And they require a test ID so that you can do things, some set of things while you're in quarantine. But other jurisdictions say, you know what, if you arrive without a test or a vaccine, we're going to put you back on the plane and send you home. And so a governance file, mapping those subtle differences in workflow could really help the agents understand how they're supposed to behave on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. Right now, this code that I'm showing only accounts for happy path, but error conditions would be something that we're going to model as well. So
I think something of importance here, though, is that we do need to model the portions, at least portions of the protocol flow, because, for instance, presentations is a really good example, because we want to dictate what should be requested so that the holder can identify, or the prover can identify whether or not that is conforming to the governance. And we need to be able to dictate, the issuer or the verifier has requested a vaccination, but I only have a test result. So they need to be able to propose a different flow. So I think some of the steps to the individual protocol flows are complicated and need some oversight or dictating by the governance or by the agent. And I think the governance is the right route. So
I agree with you there, James, especially on what the requirements are. That's very clearly something that will be added here. And I think that the describing prerequisites would allow, and then the error condition if the prerequisites aren't met, that would help at the protocol level. So yeah, so I don't know, like the idea here is to not, like, we started to put this on a whiteboard, and after diagramming, the 6 steps of connecting and the 9 steps of issuing and 11 steps of a proof, we thought, wait a minute, we're duplicating the state machines that already exist, the flows that already exist at the protocol RFCs. We don't want to rewrite the entirety of all the Aries specs into this governance file. And so we decided to go a little bit more meta, and we'll provide protocol level guidance where the steps to following the protocol are not explicit enough to know exactly what to do next. And you can tell that this is definitely a work in progress as I'm typing edits in the middle of my presentation. There's a lot to do here.
Mike, where you had initial state true, it's spelled wrong. If you can fix that while we're here.
Yes,
this is why many eyes are better than one. Oh, you fixed it already. You had an extra T in there.
I'm scrambling as we go. There's lots wrong with this document, and we'll find more. But this is just kind of showing the direction we're going. The results.
Oh, it's there at the bottom. In Tishel.
There we go. In Tishel. Yep. All right.
I can't help myself. I'm so sorry.
No, it's that level of attention to detail that helps this. Let's see here. Now that it's in this view, it disappeared.
So you mentioned that, down a little bit more. You mentioned that that you guys had whiteboarded some of this. Is there value in having the flow diagram at a very high level where you can say, like, obviously it's only as good as the first pass, but that's the template structure to picture out, like you go here and then you go here and then you go here, or is that really just redundant to what's going on here?
There are people learn by all sorts of different methods. Some like this code, some would love a picture, some would like to watch a demo, and we'll make as many of those different modalities of communicating this available as possible. So I have that diagram, and it's in my engineered chicken scratch on a whiteboard, but we'll make sure that it's in a legible diagram as soon as we can, so that people can look at it.
So what kind of problems have you run into in trying to describe these interactions, the rules, as you've dug in more deeply?
So one problem was some of the rules don't fit neatly into one defined bucket. So for example, you could list all of the prerequisites in the governance file as just a plain old list. But you know, there's some categories of things like what is the next step that could live in a list at the governance level as a rule, or that would live as a step in the interaction flow that you're trying to describe. You know, there may be trying to eliminate redundancy is tricky. The other thing that we're finding is there are a lot of things that need to be defined in a way that would be understandable to a machine. So like, we've named these steps, and so making sure that we've consistently followed the naming of the steps, and that the name of the steps doesn't collide with the name of the schema. So, you know, there's redundancy is a big one, and then fully defining everything. We haven't gotten far enough to, you know, to see everything that needs to be defined yet. And then where in the document things should live is another one. So yeah, those are kind of the problems we've hit so far.
Is there also and maybe we're not there yet, but thinking ahead, some pros and cons to how we design this in terms of making it super granular, where each thing is its own step, and so you can support multiple pathways versus having them bundled as you have these 3 things and then you can move on?
I think that one thing that could be done here is maybe a flag that says whether one step follows another is a mandatory step, or whether it's merely suggested. That could be one way to deal with that, because, you know, one thing that James likes to raise his hand and say to keep in mind frequently is, he says, remember, prescribing the entirety of the workflow could be useful, but there are still cases where perhaps an ad hoc interaction or a modified interaction where the parties involved, you know, may take human intervention or a special case exception or something like that. So the steps become a suggestion rather than a requirement. So if you could say, you know, I've already, you know, we've already got an existing connection, and let's just jump straight to the vaccine exemption workflow, for example, or something like that. And we'll, you know, skip some steps to the workflow because we've already done something, or because something doesn't apply here. Being able to construct alternate or ad hoc type of situations is still useful. So yeah, maybe an optional flag or a required flag would be useful for that. So yeah, a lot of work to do. This is getting close to, I mean, we have to fill out the prerequisites, and we need to add some of the list of attributes that are requested. And then we would be at a point where we may be able to write some test code to have an agent try to interpret this and do something with it, rather than just model my thoughts in JSON form.
Have we found any significant gaps in the proposed Aries RFC, the 430? Or is it comprehensive enough that so far everything seems to fit under that umbrella?
These interaction documents, the kind of the state machine of steps, was not included in the original Aries 430 RFC. But the way that Daniel had laid it out and formatted things, it was not much of a stretch to add it. We will definitely have probably 2 RFCs that will be added in addition to, no, 3 RFCs in addition to Daniel's. His RFC says right at the top, this RFC is intended to describe what could be. And we're going to have 3 RFCs where we say, here is something that has been implemented. This is, a description of what is and can be followed by other people. One of the RFCs will be around identifying the actual parties involved and their roles. Another RFC will be around what we end up doing with rules. And we'll have another RFC that says, here's how we've implemented the interaction documents that Keith shared with us at the Aries working group. And his was also theoretical, but here's a practical real life implementation.
Interesting. Are you continuing to work on this, and should we schedule an update for next week or the week after? What's the kind of the tentative plan for progress?
I think we should schedule a follow-up. Probably 2 weeks would be best. And we're highly motivated to do this because I have at least 2 projects with clients where governance to this kind of level is becoming very important.
Cool.
I can ask this question, and maybe I just missed it. The answer went over my head. So you have what you do next defined in here. That's assuming that it passes the thing defined above, right?
I think this was focusing on happy path as of right now. So I think we need the error path flows as well, so that you can either move from one step to an error or from one step to the next step in the flow.
Okay, thanks.
And that's all I have to share, my messy work in progress here. But we've hit some things that are a little bit tricky, but we have not hit anything that is insurmountable or too ugly to consider. So this is looking promising.
Don't beat yourself up, Mike, because I think even if it's beginnings without too much polishing, it allows us to have the discussion and some exposure to it. So it's much appreciated.
It's something that Sam is always a fan of, is getting something rough written out and then implementing it in code and learning from that. And I think we'll learn a lot as we continue to develop here.
Cool. Any questions or comments on the current state of machine readable governance and where we're headed with that?
One comment on the mobile side is that we're working to implement this, but we're currently working on resolving some dependency issues in order to do so. In particular, we're working out some, we had forked the Aries Framework JavaScript project. So we're working to remove any of the custom pieces that were involved in that to bring us back to the most current version of Aries Framework JavaScript. And that'll give us a good base for implementing the machine readable governance. So that's the trajectory on the mobile side for implementing what is in front of you.
Cool. Oops.
Mike, just to clarify, is the plan to finish working on the happy path and then loop back? Or do you not know yet about your approach to kind of tackling the next phase?
I think that we need to model at least one error condition to say, how is that going to work? Before we go, so do a little bit of breadth first work before we go deep to specifying the whole chain. Yeah, I think that I'll take James's concerns into account here and say, here, what's an error condition look like? And what does what does specifying the requested attributes for proof request look like? And try and get an idea for what things should look like before doing the work to write them, document them all.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions about current state or path for governance? If not, let's hop over and take a look at our technical roadmap. So the project goals have been summarized in our playbook. Looking at some of the higher level goals, we've been focused on some broad categories of interoperability, a reference deployment, interoperability testing, the machine readable governance. Those are kind of the things that are in under our list of topics that we need to take care of. In terms of interoperability, I think we've arrived at a solid PCR test for the schema, or a test schema. The recovered, we determined, could be handled by a PCR test that's positive instead of negative in a elapsed time. Our vaccination code is not yet complete to implement the schema that we've landed on there, or the exemptions. Mike, you want to give us an update on where the vaccination and exemption schemas are in the code base?
So we've updated the code base to support these schemas, except for a few recent alterations. Just a few fields. So those will need a review pass, but we've successfully demoed issuing a vaccine at least once. And so with some minor modification, those will be done soon.
Okay, so these are almost green.
Yeah,
So
the vaccination and exemption are just about to go green.
Green means they're done, yellow means they're in progress. So the vaccination and exemption are close. Our review of the Good Health Pass is kind of an in progress thing. The breadth and depth of Good Health Passes exceeds the current time frame and might extend out as long as a year before all of the bits and pieces of their full recommendations could be considered. But we've done our initial review of that and targeted some of the initial features for our next phase of technical work. And so that's an in progress thing and will likely stay in progress for a long time. Coming up would be support for JSON-LD and BBS Plus signatures derived out of the Good Health Pass. So those are kind of near-term future things that are coming up. Our reference deployment is not got current work happening there yet. On the machine readable governance, we wanted to dig into the format definition and look at the rules, get some kind of agreement on that. We're making good progress on that. The machine readable governance feeds into what we're doing with GCCN, the Global COVID Credential Network, to try to help make a reasonable set of rules that could be shared. So if you have a trust framework and for instance, IBM creates a trust framework, the Cardea community creates a different trust framework, and a third vendor creates yet another definition of what the machine readable governance looks like. It doesn't do any good to have a global COVID credential network that has all these trust frameworks in it if none of them are interoperable. So we're pushing towards trying to get agreement on what the format definitions might look like so that they can actually be useful between ecosystems. Those are kind of the current things on this high level list. There are some detailed bits as well on the technical roadmap. Getting the code migrated to the open source repos. I think the last bit is the verifier enterprise agent, and that one's still in progress. I guess these should be marked in green too when they're completed. Update on migration of code. Are there other bits besides that enterprise agent that needs to be pushed into the open source repo? That's a question for Mike and James.
Currently we're still referencing the Indicio's Aries framework JavaScript fork. But since we are removing or working to remove that as a dependency, I would push for, we likely do not need to make a fork of that in Cardea.
Okay, so this item here, the Aries framework JavaScript, should not be pushed to it. We are removing a dependency on a private repo, putting it back onto the public Aries framework JavaScript repo, so we don't need this one.
Correct, with the asterisk that the Indicio's fork is public, so that it is usable. It's just not in the Cardea umbrella.
Okay. Okay. We're migrating our state management to Redux. Is Megan on the call today? Does not look like she is on the call. Mike, can you give us a brief update on that?
Sorry, an update on what was it?
The Redux.
The Redux. So our code bases for the enterprise agents are using React Native for the, or not React Native, React.js for the front end. And one of the things that is tricky to come up with properly is how to manage the state, the stored variables of the application. One approach is to use the native built-in state management until your app grows to the point where that's too complicated and no longer feasible. And then you switch to a state management library like Redux. Well, the application has grown to that point. And so we are looking to change our state management to use Redux. We're working on an initial proof of concept, basically, of how that's, how that code will work. And Megan, the reason we referenced Megan is she's leading that effort. And she was, it's a couple of days worth of effort, and she's somewhere in the middle, somewhere around halfway done. And so hopefully we'll be able to make those updates to make state management a lot more understandable and cleaner inside the application soon.
Okay, we had a number of things marked as in progress. The abstract WebSocket messages, the external records provider, that is in progress. Kim, do you have an update on that one?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Update on what?
External records provider.
We haven't moved any of that to the external Cardea project yet.
Okay.
So
Coordinate
that's pending.
mediation protocol.
That's been merged into AFJ. We're working through a couple of bug fixes with that. And so once that those are resolved, then we'll be in a position to also update the Cardea holder and verifier to utilize Akapai as a mediator versus a custom AFJ mediator.
So that's in progress work at the AFJ level right now, and then follow-up work and the mobile agents.
Correct. It's a nearing completion though, is the.
Okay. We had an item of upgrading Akapi to the .6 release.
Kim has done the upgrade at least once, but it's not been broadly applied yet. So we have a few more upgrades to do.
Okay.
We'll probably also decide to just go to 0.7 because 0.7 was released after we built this diagram or this list. And yeah.
Okay. So we'll probably be leapfrogging directly to that. Eric's data storage on our mobile platforms.
That work is currently is not in progress, so that should probably change.
Change back to nothing. Not being currently worked on.
Correct. The machine readable governance framework has taken a higher priority.
Okay. So this work here, the basic machine readable governance, that's the thing that we've been discussing and working on right now, right?
Correct.
And are all of them being like across the board here, yellow?
I think we're starting on the health agent. Is that right, Mike? That's the guinea pig?
Yeah, that's well, and that's honestly where most of the governance lives. As far as, you know, well, I don't know, that may not be true, but yeah, that's where we're started.
Okay.
On the mobile side, we're doing AFJ, and I would probably put the folder mobile.
Okay. Invitation management.
This is working code for a client, and we have permission to migrate it to Cardea, and the migration of that code to Cardea is in process. So almost green.
Okay. I think those are the items that are on the list, but this represents the pieces that are internal techie type features that are less about the overall features. They're more about how the internals of the project work, and so they didn't get covered in our high level view of what's going on, but they're important to making the product usable and maintainable. So we maintain this internal list as well of features that are desirable for the engineers to continue to work on. Are there other topics on these technical roadmap bits that we should discuss today?
One thing that is, I don't think on here that I don't think we had updated is that we're, and this is a little bit more of a technical view, but we're updating instead of using a data transfer protocol for passing of demographic information, we're switching to using the present proof protocol since this is transfer of PII and more personal information. A self-attested presentation is more suitable for that purpose. So that is something we're working on here.
Where do you suggest that gets added?
It looks like line 14, support present proof 2.0.
Ah, look at
It's
that.
part of that effort, I think. Or you could label it that way.
The present we were as we talked about, we would be doing this using present proof v1 first, so that the present proof v2 is a slightly additional effort.
So we need to add the line for the v1.
Correct.
Okay, and that one's currently in progress, you said?
Yes.
How big is that effort for the mobile agent, James?
That is probably an S on the holder and then a S on the AFJ.
Cool.
And those are both in progress right now.
Is there any work on the verification side as well to handle that as a presentation?
Only on the enterprise side. So this is for the self-attested demographic and passport data that gets sent to the enterprise agents.
Yeah, everything beyond that is no longer self-attested. It's an issuer-based credential, right?
Correct.
Cool.
And part of that motivation there was to allow for our machine readable governance work so that we're not the data transfer protocol has its uses, but was something that's not been fully formalized yet. So we is not in the mainstream of AFJ at the moment. So
Okay. This list goes all the way down to things that are at the very bottom of the prioritization of the 10 is the top priority and all the way to the bottom. And we are basically not looking at anything that gets below the halfway mark because we're not actively working on stuff there. As we finish tasks, then we can rejuggle some of the technical work that's going on and add to or modify the items on this list. Are there general questions about some of the technical bits that we're working on? If not, we will hop back over to our agenda. I think that the technical roadmap work is making good progress. We haven't been reporting on all the details of that, but there is a bunch of technical work that's going on there. And some of those topics may come up for consideration if they're controversial. Are there other items that we should cover before we end the call for today? Any other business?
Maybe what are we going to talk about next week?
Next week,
Well, go ahead.
next week, we're probably going to have one more round of schemas, trying to nail those down so that we can have them all publicized and available for people to deal with. And we have 2 different schemas to go over with. I don't know that they're particularly complex. Do you think that will take the entire time, Keela?
I would think not. We have a couple of parking lot items that we have for agendas. So I think we have a meeting either later today or tomorrow, Ken. We can try to get that squared away and sent out to the group so that you know what's on the agenda.
Okay. That's a reasonably good plan.
Excellent. And if there's any suggestions, of course, you guys can always help drive what is the agenda for the coming up meetings. So feel free to lead us if you feel there's something we need to pay attention to.
Okay. Anything else? Going once, going twice. We appreciate everybody's participation and contributions to both the code and the overall plan and direction for the project. If you have people who want to participate, feel free to invite them. We're looking for at a number of people who are starting demonstrators to show interoperability with Cardea and other projects like that. So we're looking for, we will be scheduling as some of those become more available and out of private mode into more publicly shareable mode. We will probably be scheduling time for demos of interactions and interoperability. So if you have a project that you're working on and you're getting close to having that ready, drop either myself or Keela an indicator that you might want to be put on the agenda for a demonstration. If there's nothing else, we'll let the call go. Thank you all for your participation and contribution. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, for presenting.